Welcome back to Beyond the Headline, everyone. It's a really exciting day to be on the show because I'm here with my friend Greg Hong, the founder and CEO of Reserve. Greg, thank you for being back on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Jenna.
I'd
Excited
love
to be here.
I'd love to start out with a really exciting week that Reserve has had. Can you give us a hint at all the great things going on?
Yeah, I think the thing we're most excited about is the announcement of our larger ecosystem. We announced our table management product today, or 2 days ago, I should say now, that is live in 150 restaurants across the country. They're using that everything for their wait list, for booking reservations, and table management. And we also announced our reserve.com website, which allows diners to now do the same things they were able to do on our app, now through our website as well, which is fantastic to now have this entire ecosystem for both diners and restaurants alike, where they can go to book their reservations, figure out where they want to go out to eat, and handle payment all the way through the end of that experience.
I think it really lends back to the holistic experience that your team has always been so passionate about. And it starts with working with your partners. Reserve for Restaurants, you started working on many, many months ago at your restaurants with your partners, making sure that you were delivering what they needed, not what you thought they needed.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think for us, it's always been about working hand in hand with our partners. So we spent a lot of time, once the product was at a place where it was stable enough to get it in restaurants in Q4 of last year, actually testing it in restaurants, sitting alongside them. Many of our staff members on a nightly basis would go in, it's called in the restaurant industry staging, but it's effectively shadowing a host or a hostess over the course of an evening, understanding what the pain points were and how we could improve them, and all the subtle features or large features that they needed to be able to run their dining room effectively. And in that process, we developed a really wonderful product that I think has resonated with quite a few restaurateurs.
Can you highlight a few of the features?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of the features that are, in some senses, very standard. I think there's parts of table management that are, in some senses, commoditized. So things like seating a guest off of your wait list. I think the parts of that we're most excited about there is that we've optimized them. So things that might take 3 or 4 taps only take 1 or 2. If you're a host or hostess that's performing this action over the course of an evening, potentially 100 times, that makes a big difference. I think that's the core of what we built, but I think there are additional features beyond that we're really excited about. The things that stand out to me the most are, first and foremost, for our restaurant partners, they want the ability to share guest notes across potentially multiple properties. So if you've been to ABC Kitchen in New York is a great example of a restaurant that is excited about using our product because they're looking at it saying, hey, how do we potentially share guest notes between our 2 properties that share a wall? That's interesting for them and something they're potentially excited about doing as they look at our product. I think there are other larger restaurant groups that have 10, 12 restaurants that, as we've talked to them, they are really excited about what we've built on that front. Part of that, though, dovetails with the idea of how restaurants keep and track guest notes in the first place. Traditionally, they're used to one long open-ended notes field. So a note from 10 years might be stored as recently as a note from 1 year ago. And that sequence of notes just kind of stacks up like a running scroll. I think comparatively what a restaurant would rather see is, hey, I want my food or allergy notes in one place, I want my wine preferences in another place, and I want the diner's seating preference in another bucket. So that way when I go to print out those guest notes and it's for a chef, I might only print out notes that are food or allergy notes for the chef because they don't care about where the diner's seating preferences are or what their wine preferences are. I think that's the part of this that is really exciting for our restaurant partners, is to have that level of guest understanding where they can keep more thoughtful notes about their guests to really deliver the caliber of experience that they want to deliver.
A word that always really comes to mind for me with Reserve, and I think dovetails off that really well, is intuition. You guys have thought through things always before implementing. And as we were discussing before, you guys have such a smart approach to growth. How do you approach it internally?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for us is doing it slow and thoughtfully to make sure that before we jump into a market, that we have the resources to be able to support that market. And we have the bodies, quite frankly, the human capital within each of those markets to really make it work. Especially for our industry, what we're seeing, the thing when we talk about staging with restaurants and taking time to actually, um, understand what they like and dislike, part of that is making sure that you have bodies that come from that industry in the first place. That builds trust and rapport, and that's something we've seen a lot of success with, which is having this balance on most of our operations teams that are um, halfway between people that have come from the industry and halfway from the direction of people that come from scaling and growing companies. So having the right bodies in place, I think, is probably at the forefront of making that happen. And I think the other part of that is just talking to other people that have rolled out companies across multiple cities, understanding what they've done, and really taking a page from their playbooks to make sure that we are not going too fast or too slow, and hiring the right people and everything else that goes along with that.
As far as current learnings right now, too, have any really stood out to you the last 6 months of 2016?
Um,
There's probably one every day.
any learning stood out to me the most? I think this idea of this balance that I think we're we're towing the line on between having this entire ecosystem and having a small but focused team. Um, I think the learning that I've had there is really making sure that you are 100% sure that if you're going to build out an entire ecosystem, you know the very minimum required parts of that ecosystem that you need to make it work. Um, that's probably been the biggest learning from my perspective, is making sure that we are focused across all of that stuff, enough that when we're building out 5 different product lines, we still can make them all work together because the lines in of themselves are focused enough to make it all work. I don't know. Being a startup and having an entire ecosystem is hard at times.
No pressure. And you guys are a team of 60 now, right?
Yeah.
How do you know when and how to make your next hire, specifically with that ecosystem? Where do you prioritize where to bring people in?
One of the exercises that we're doing a lot of is figuring out what the responsibilities are that need to be filled first, and figuring out if we have bodies that are effectively juggling 2 roles and deciding if we need to split those out. I think we're big enough at this point where we have coverage for most of the different things that we're doing. It's just whether or not that coverage is focused enough. So do we have one body that's covering 3 roles, and can they do it effectively? Do we want to focus on one of those specific roles and make it more prominent for our business? If so, then we probably need to hire a full-time body for it. I'm seeing a lot of that happening within our organization right now, at kind of the administrative, kind of corporate level. And then I think within our markets, it's where's there opportunities, where we're seeing tight-knit restaurant communities that are excited about adopting new technology and moving off of legacy providers.
And so building the team is really like building the product then.
Yeah, in a lot of senses. I think a lot of what we talk about is that, in some senses, we're an operations team that is backed and powered by great technology. And I think there's a balance on both sides at this point where both sides have a role to play. But in some senses, yeah, I think our operations team is very much an extension of our product at this point.
And you guys have been doing some great posts on team building and values, some things that were inspired by the first round CEO summit. And Anne had a great quote where she said, maintaining a fast growing distributed team is nearly impossible if you don't have a strong company culture. Can you tell us about the role the Fox Tato plays at the Serve?
So it started as a meme internally, which was, "Hey, just do the thing." The Fox Tato would just do the thing, kind of is the idea, and it turned into a much larger kind of conversational piece. I think the nice part is that when the Fox Tato, one of the values that we have around that is do the thing that ties out to the Fox Tato. So when people talk about the Fox Tato or do the thing, at the end of the day, we're a startup. No one else is going to do this thing for you. Like, you just need to get in there, get your hands dirty, and get it done. And I think there's something to that where it's not about this value of like perseverance or something like that that's a little bit more kind of generic. It's do the thing. Oh, that's the Foxtato thing, right? Like that's what you need to do. It takes on a life of its own. Um, I think there's a as part of it. One of the ones that kind of stood out to me that's one of our values is the idea of don't be shady, right? Which is so much easier to understand than integrity. And I think that's like the traditional value might be integrity or honesty. Well, don't be shady. Everyone knows what that means. It's very clear that like, hey, yeah, does that feel shady? Oh yeah, that does feel shady. Okay, I'll stop doing that. Did you do that with integrity? What does integrity mean again? Like I know what it means, but it's hard to. It doesn't have that same feeling that it generates emotionally. And I think there's a connection to each one of our values that gets expressed there. Um, but I think that's a subset of what is a larger reality. And what I mean by that is there is a core group of people that have started that when they started this company all believed in the same things that I think I encouraged them to believe in, and or brought that to the table themselves, which is how they ended up getting hired here. And I think that's something that's been so foundational to even the values that we have is finding people that just they're going to work together collaboratively. They're not going to. It's not about any one person taking credit. It's about how do we do this as a group and push it forward. And it's about solving this problem and really making a product that, and again, people love to use, whether it be a restaurant or a diner. And people are bought into that vision around here, and that's where it all starts. Those conversations interpersonally that happen where you get people to understand just that. Hey, this is what we're trying to build. I want people that are on my side that believe that we can make this better. And this is the playground that we're going to play within. These are the values that we're going to abide by as we kind of push that vision and that mission forward.
How has that come alive for you guys with your acquisitions? Because you guys have had five so far.
How did that come alive, you said?
Your culture and those conversations, when does that come up? And this is how we grow at Reserve and view these types of things.
I think one of the things that we've been really lucky in is with all the acquisitions we've done, there were parts of when we think about this kind of customer journey from discovery and booking a table to payment or to analytics or to feedback. Each of the companies that we brought in fit within one of those buckets generally, and as a result, they became part of the larger whole. And I think that's where we've had a lot of success with that generally is that. The people that we brought in, it was like, oh yeah, you understand this large vision thing that we're trying to do. We're trying to build out this whole ecosystem and make a great product that people love. Okay, great. This is your part in that and your role within that, and how you're going to play and grow within this organization. The fact that they were given that understanding on the way in, and there was an agreement as to what that understanding was, made that work really well. I think we're super excited because they have and have brought so much institutional knowledge that they had from working on that specific segment of the problem for so many years that when they brought it to the table, it really dovetailed nicely with what we're building, and it's worked out great.
So it's really about like finding a piece exactly where they put it, and then you can kind of plop them down.
Basically, yeah. I mean, and that's at least that's been our strategy to date, and that's worked very well for us.
And do you find that the values, Greg, and having them described, as you were saying, not as sort of broad words that we may not exactly understand, but don't be shady, have helped people immediately integrate into the culture?
I do. I think the nicest part about them is that we see team members around the office using them. They get used as their own lingo and their own jargon within our organization, and that's powerful because it's reinforcing, right? Whereas I think when you think about these other kind of stock words that you hear when people talk about values, they don't get used within the organization, and as a result, they don't have real meaning. If it doesn't get used, it doesn't have real meaning from my perspective, and I think that's where it's worked really well for us.
How about on the end of transparency there, which becomes a whole different game as you grow simply because there's so many things going on. I know that's one of the values too.
You said transparency?
Transparency.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, that's super important for us. I think the hardest part about doing that as in a growing organization is that we strive to do it every day. And I think there are times where when we are doing it to even the best of our ability, there are communication gaps that happen when you're a 70-person organization. And there's a balance between, or not a balance, but there's a need to have a certain amount of rapport with all the team members that can make up for the communication gaps that happen that don't tie out to the transparency piece. One of the value that actually ties out to that for us is we call it go to the source, which is like, hey, just go ask that person and they should be more than happy to tell you exactly what's going on with this project or that thing or whatever it happens to be. And I think us kind of encouraging that kind of language where it's like, hey, go to the source, go talk to that person directly. Like, don't hear it secondhand from one person to the other. Helps with that transparency piece, but it's a constant work in progress to make sure that happens. And as we add new people, that they understand that is important to us in our organization.
And it really just goes back to that game we used to play when we were kids of, going around the circle and everyone whispers something. And by the time it gets to you, it's like totally different than what someone started with.
Yep. I think there's, I've often thought that, that businesses could benefit from a almost like a counselor, like an internal counselor to mediate discussions between people at times, because I think you get to a place where, to your point, what you're articulating is what I see with staff all the time is like one person has one assumption about how they should achieve the goal, another person has a different assumption about how they should achieve the goal, and they're both at an impasse in the fact that their language and their own perspectives that they're bringing to that conversation don't allow them to have an understanding of what the other person means. They think they might understand what the other person means, but they don't fully always understand it. And that's where you end up with a disconnect where two people who are trying to achieve the same goal can end up at odds with each other. And that's where I think that ironically, that guidance counselor or the counselor sort of thing comes into play for management. That's at the end of the day, the job when even when they go to the source, they can't communicate or they can't kind of bridge the gap. As management, our kind of roles are to help facilitate uniting those people together and to one kind of common vision.
In your experiences, what have you learned about doing that, especially for new team members? Because sometimes it's a little nerve-wracking to say, hey, this is what I think.
It depends on the person and the personality type. I think and I think within most orgs, you have half the people that are a little bit more forward and are going to be very direct, and you have some people that are more quiet. And you asked earlier, what's been a big learning experience for me? It's how do you get the people that are more quiet to speak up, and how do you get the people that are the squeaky wheel to kind of quiet down a little bit, to ideally get it to a place where everyone's communicating with each other thoughtfully.
So I think my main takeaway from today, Greg, which I'm so excited about because as I shared, I've been really admiring the way you guys run the team, is that you really just need all the wheels turning in the right direction to get you to that grand vision.
That is what we work on every day around here, and it is a constant work in progress. And I think that is the thing for me. It's just like, it takes work. It's like, any relationship takes work, whether it be personal, whether it be in work or otherwise. You need to have all the bodies aligned in terms of what that vision is, and it takes constant pressure and dialogue and so forth to ultimately get everyone to come together, and that's what it takes.
I want to close with just one question, and it was a great insight that you shared in your post with the new reserve announcements. And you said the restaurant reservation process is so familiar that it's easy to overlook the fact that it could be a lot better. How are you, both as a founder and as a team, constantly asking, what could we do to be making this better? What's next for us?
Yeah, I think the thing that comes to mind for me is we want to be the tool that you use when you go out to eat for every reservation. And the interesting part about that is that statement ladders up from all the different parts of the dining experience. So if you're thinking about at the end of your meal, man, that check splitting process was super easy and I didn't have to think about the bill. I'm going to now use Reserve to book my next reservation because that is part of a larger kind of ecosystem and process. Um, Whether it be a diner or a restaurant that's saying, hey, I want every single one of my diners booking through Reserve because they're going to have a better experience. Um, I think that's the part that we always think of is, hey, at that point that somebody decides that they're hungry and they want to go out to eat, are we going to be top of mind for them? And did this feature or this part of our product deliver on that vision where, hey, yeah, I'm going to think about Reserve next time because payment was easy. Or I'm a restaurant and I want my diners to book through Reserve because I was able to keep better guest notes on them to understand what their likes and dislikes are. Therefore, I want every diner to book through Reserve. That's kind of where it all comes back to and how we challenge ourselves internally against everything we're building.
I love it, and we get to see it come alive in every Reserve experience. There's so many times on social media where I see the check is paid, which I love. It always makes me smile. What's the best way, Greg, for everyone to stay up to date with what you guys are doing if they're waiting for you to come to their city? And then also to get started, because you guys have an amazing blog with incredible interviews and food pictures.
Yeah, I think the reserve.com is probably one of the easiest places to kind of get started. If we're not in your city, we have it's effectively an option where you can say, hey, not in our city yet, click here. That's one of the great ways people can find us. Our blog is fantastic, as you mentioned. We've got a lot of great content there. Even if you're not in one of the key markets, it's always nice to look at those wonderful pictures of all the great dishes that our chefs are cooking up, or that the restaurants' chefs are cooking up, I should say. And I think those two properties are probably the best places to start.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenna.